some big realignment news happened little less than a day after some realignment rumors dropped Monday. Of course, over the weekend, Texas State had reportedly received an invite from the Mountain West. Monday, it came out that UTEP had received an invite from the Mountain West. Neither, as of last night, neither had accepted until this morning. We got news, and you can go see this on TexasFootball.com. UTEP had accepted their invite to the Mountain West. And soon after, the official announcement was done, and the Mountain West had announced everything. So now that puts us at where we are now.
Yeah, Craven, you don't even need to work out. That's a workout enough, just explaining all of that.
So, let's reset now, and I'll pass it on to Craven here. Again, you can go check this news at TexasFootball.com. Keep it locked there as well. Any other news will come down there. Craven, where does that put us now? Because the Mountain West now has 7, I believe.
Race to 8. They need one more. The Pac-12, I believe, now has received, Gonzaga has now joined, I believe, in all sports that they play, which does not include football. I'm trying to think of anything else as far as official or joined has gone. No, that sounds
I think that's basically it. But that still leaves Texas State. There are 4 options there. Obviously, the Pac-12, no official bid, I believe, has been announced. Mountain West, of course, officially announced their invitation. AAC, they're not even officially rumored to be looking right now at Texas State, but they're in the mix, according to some. And then, of course, they could always just stay put in the Sun Belt. So, Craven, where are we at now with realignment? Just encapsulating all of that that's been your morning.
Yeah, I mean, for UTEP, it made a ton of sense. They've wanted to be in the Mountain West for a long time now. It's not exactly the Mountain West that they've always wanted to join, but still it puts them back into contention with some WAC teams that they used to play with back in the early 2000s, late 1990s. It's better geography-wise. That Conference USA contract was like $400,000 to $500,000 per school each year for the payout. They expect the Mountain West one to be around $4 million once they get all the money. They're still figuring out the buyout, but that's been around $2 million for schools in the past. And so if you're UTEP and you're going to make 4 or 5 times the money in the television contract, the buyout is understandable and reasonable, and you get to spend less in travel. It all makes sense to go join the Mountain West. But as you mentioned, they still need another team. Pac-12 needs another team. The reason that is you have to have 8 full-time members to qualify for the postseason. So if the winner of the Mountain West or the winner of the Pac-12 wants to be in college football playoff discussions as that G5 spot, G6 spot soon when the Pac-12 comes back, then they're going to have to get to 8. The way that impacts the state of Texas is with Texas State and then Tarleton, right? If Texas State doesn't accept the bid to the Mountain West, which I've heard is more likely than likely, right? That they're going to turn down the Mountain West if they already haven't. Then that means Tarleton's kind of up next. I think the Mountain West would like 2 schools within the Texas footprint. Tarleton's 60 miles from DFW and Stephenville. That's close enough for some of these conferences to kind of talk them in to that being worthwhile. Travel-wise, it makes sense. They got a 24,000-seat stadium nowadays. They have some donors that are motivated to add to that athletic budget. And so I think Tarleton becomes a real option for the Mountain West. And then where does that leave Texas State? I think the American noise was before the trio of Tulane, Memphis, and USF came back to the conference. I think Texas State was going to be an option to come in to the American if those 3, maybe if UTSA leaves as well. But once those teams came back and Air Force recommitted to the Mountain West, I think the American may want to stand pat, not share any more money, not split the pie any further. And so to me, on paper, this isn't me reporting. This is just me reading some tea leaves, talking to people, trying to do the best I can to speculate here. I think it's between the Pac-12 and staying in the Sun Belt, and just kind of what that means mathematically behind the scenes for President Dampus, Don Coryell, kind of the decision makers back there. They have to figure out is if the extra travel isn't worth it with the TV contract. I tend to believe that it is, and if the Pac-12 offer does come Texas State's way, it's probably going to accept it. So from my standpoint, from what I know right now, that's kind of where we're at with conference realignment in the state of Texas.
Yeah, and for some people who may not understand, on paper, right, you look at, let's not include the TV deal, right? Not everybody are freaks like us and pay attention to that kind of stuff, but we know that's what drives these contracts. Let's look at the on-field football. A lot of people may look at that and say, the Sun Belt, they're very good. They have App State, they have James Madison. You look at that.
this all legitimately stems from the Sun Belt locking in a long-term, basically a 8 to 10-year deal with ESPN. I believe they initially did that in 2017. They expanded their rights partnership. That deal now extends to 2030, 2031. As you mentioned, that is not a deal that is as lucrative as the Mountain West and the Pac-12. Now, the Pac-12 and the Mountain West have to go to negotiations, Pac-12 next year, Mountain West after next year. But even then, they would presumably, as everybody in the media knows, live sports is everything. And so they will presumably go to another bidder with a deal that could potentially pay out more than what the Sun Belt is doing, because the Sun Belt is locked in to $500,000 to every single school for until 2030, 2031. Now, their other revenue shares are a little bit higher, but even total, that's not as much as other schools are offering. So that's where Texas State is, like Craven mentioned. Yes, Texas State would have an ease of travel because the Sun Belt and the MAC are basically the only, and the SEC are basically the only conferences that have any sort of geographical regional prominence. So it does ease travel as far as that's concerned. But with the Mountain West and the Pac-12, yes, there's negatives to having to go back to the drawing table. If you're the Pac-12, for example, right, you're not negotiating with Oregon and Washington's brand anymore. You're negotiating with Boise State and Oregon State. And so, yeah, they're going to offer you less money. But that's still a chance to get more money than what the Sun Belt is getting. So Texas State has that possibility in their mind. They could just say, you know what, we'll just stay here. We're making decent enough funds as it is. I do wonder what the ceiling is if you go to the negotiating table with the Mountain West, with a Pac-12, even with the damaged, quote unquote, damaged brand of those conferences. Could you still squeeze out some from a bunch of networks? I think the Mountain West right now has like partnerships across 4 networks: Fox, Warner Brothers, all these different things.
If the Pac-12 wasn't able to do it with Oregon, UCLA, and USC, why could they do it with Texas State and Mountain West schools? and that's a fair criticism as well, right? They could not squeeze as much money as they needed to when they had the money brands, and now you're expecting them to get, obviously not the same, but like you're expecting them to negotiate adequately with these brands. Again, probably a safe bet to make, but you still have to take the chance if you're Texas State and that comes calling, because you see UTSA now becoming a full member of the AAC, getting a full payout, right? And you have to close that gap in some way. Obviously, that's not going to be the same. They're going to be making more from the AAC, but you don't want to be the one left behind. As we saw with this past realignment with UTEP, kind of getting left in Conference USA for a little bit until now the Mountain West is like, hey, we got to find a way to stay in there. So unfortunately, you know, the on-field stuff, yes, I do think the Sun Belt is a better competitive conference, top to bottom, than the Mountain West. But that's not what matters.
And that's not what probably should be mattering when a lot of these guys' bottom line comes down to how much money can we put into this program.
Well, UTEP going to the Mountain West is kind of the first conference realignment move that makes sense almost geographically, because you forget how far west UTEP is. But Craven, I have a question for you. When did Tarleton kind of emerge as maybe a player? Because we were talking about it before we recorded. They were a D2 school like 5 years ago or something like that. Yeah. It's almost like a challenge when you mention the DFW geographic location. Like, what is the mile radius cutoff before we can stop claiming DFW? Like, is it 60? Is it 100? How close you are to DFW? When did they kind of become a player in all of this?
I think you're muted, Craven.
Oh, do we lose Craven? Audio?
Paging Craven.
No, he knows he can hear us. But
Okay. Try again.
Nothing.
Okay. Well, I'll just call him.
Okay.
Yes, if audio's.
All right. So while we figure that out, yeah, like we will. You mentioned it. Tarleton was a D2 school a couple years ago, right? Now, granted, to be fair, they've worked to be a lot more competitive, a lot quicker than I think a lot of people anticipated. That's not an easy jump to make, right? As we're seeing with somebody like Commerce, right? Commerce made that similar jump. They're not faring as well in FCS. So I would not be, as Craven mentioned, with the donors, with a pipeline of sorts with DFW, right? They're counting it as DFW. I know where Stephenville is. It's not DFW. But again, that's like saying Waco's It's not DFW, but like it's the same distance basically. You consider Waco as reachable to Dallas and Houston?
It's not
Dallas
as
and
big
Austin.
of a, saying Waco is close to DFW. That's not as big of a jump as saying Stephenville is close to DFW.
Right,
like that.
but
it's the same type of
if
deal.
you're a Baylor fan, you're like, yeah, we can recruit Dallas, we can recruit Austin. That's the theory behind getting Stephenville, right? Considering Stephenville and Tarleton. So I do think it makes sense if your idea is to go into a new market, and especially if Texas State doesn't pan out. If Sam Houston doesn't have the facilities that you probably, or the funding, as we've seen with their issues jumping to FBS, okay, if Sam Houston probably isn't, because you'd probably say in a perfect world, Sam Houston probably, right? On the highway going to Houston, on the highway going back to DFW, you have to go through Huntsville. But as we've seen, they've had a lot of funding issues with there. So I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. I think we have Craven back on now if he wants to chime in as well. I was just saying how the geographic tangential geographic ties to DFW, and like you mentioned with the funding, it kind of makes sense with what we've seen from Tarleton's success jumping to FCS if they made that transition to the next level. Craven.
Yeah, because, I think you got to remember, while we, being from Texas, know Stephenville isn't DFW, you can still fly into there and have a pretty quick, easy, stop in Stephenville to go play a game there. Yeah. So some of this is about the economics for the other team. What is easy to go travel? What costs you less to go travel? Flying to El Paso is easy. Flying to DFW and then taking a bus 60 miles to Stephenville, relatively easy when we consider what these schools typically go through trying to travel to places, right? It'll be easier to get to Stephenville, for example, than it will Washington State. Mm-hmm. Pullman is impossible to get to. And so I think if you're going to strike out at Texas State, maybe, or if you're really just trying to build a base in Texas, Tarleton's probably the best available option outside of UTEP, outside of Texas State.
Yeah. So keep it locked to TexasFootball.com. We will have all your realignment news there. Craven, follow Mike Craven on Twitter as well. He will have all your updates there. This is all happening now. I think UTEP was the expected domino, and now it kind of figures from there because now the Mountain West presumably has to move on, or Texas State has to make decisions. So we'll be all over that in the coming days, maybe day. We'll see. All right, moving on. Speaking of Texas State, we had a little bit of news come out Monday that kind of stemmed from Saturday a little bit, but we'll explain why here in a bit. As everybody remembers, UNLV quarterback Matt Sluka maintained his redshirt eligibility, so kind of withheld for the rest of the season. That involved a bunch of conversations about NIL, all that stuff, who's right, who's wrong, whatever. So then some other players also, because we're approaching that, if you've played X amount of games now, you lose your red shirt.
The 4 games.
Yes,
if you
4
play
games.
more than 4 games, and D'Eriq King is the godfather of this move.
He is very
former
much the
Houston quarterback who opted out after 4 games because if you play a 5th game, you burn the red shirt opportunity.
Yes, so we're seeing players now hit that 4-game limit and say, oh, we'll see, or contemplate, or either announce, as Jahari Rogers from SMU did, announce that he is leaving to maintain his eligibility and maybe cash in his value elsewhere. So that goes to Texas State's Ben Bell, who, and I'll let Craven take it from here, who has contemplated, by the way, I should mention, he's nursing an injury, right? That is one of the things. He's nursing an injury of some sort. That's why that's the primary reason why he didn't play in Saturday's game against Sam Houston. But it was reported that he is also considering his eligibility. No decision made yet. I believe he practiced the other day, or at least participated to some extent to however he could, according to GJ Kinney. So, Craven, you want to take it from there to kind of explain his situation? Because he's been basically Texas State's best defensive player by a good stretch.
Yeah, I feel like this is kind of a new reality, especially for G5 football teams, right? Like a lot of these guys who are really, really good college football players may not transition to the NFL. Like, Ben Bell's 6'2", 235, probably not getting a ton of scouting on the NFL side. So, his last year of college ball, this college eligibility, may be the biggest earning potential he has, especially on a football field. And so I think if you get kind of banged up, you get knocked up in a way that, normally you'd probably play a football game if it's a big conference game or whatever. I think you'd start making some business decisions, or at least start letting them kind of creep into your mind. It sounds like that's kind of what's going on with Ben Bell. No decision has been made. They're going to take this thing week to week. And he was a little banged up and missed the game against Sam Houston. He can still play in one more before he has to make a final decision. I was told, they're not kind of picking and choosing when that week is. But we'll see kind of moving forward. I think he's got a decision to make, whether he wants to play the rest of this year and see where it goes, or if he wants to sit out for the rest of the time, preserve that eligibility, and see if he can cash in on NIL at a bigger program that maybe needs a pass rushing specialist.
I totally agree with you, Craven, about the guys in G5 who might not be NFL stars. I think that NIL has lowered the bar for the dream of buying your parents a car. You know what I mean? So it's like, I can now, even if I don't make it to the NFL, provide for my family who's provided so much for me monetarily. And I'll never judge a guy, denounce a guy for using this loophole that the NCAA has to where you can stop after 4 games and then go on to make some more money at a Power 4 school. But I do think the loophole needs to be closed, if that makes sense. I'd not like Ben Bell used the loophole because the loophole's there, but the loophole should be closed. I kind of believe with the Jeff Traylor school of thought where everyone should just get 5 years. No red shirts. You can transfer and have immediate eligibility every time, but after 5 years, it's closed. Because there's 2 things to note about Ben Bell's case. He's only playing this year because he got a mulligan year from the NCAA for COVID.
Sure.
So
Jahari Rogers as well.
Jahari Rogers as well. So it's basically like me and you were sitting at a blackjack table. I'm out of my chips. You give me a chip to keep playing with me, and I take it to the roulette table. And you're like, well, that wasn't what you're supposed to do with it.
Right.
Texas State, another thing to note is they also ponied up NIL money for Ben Bell. The Maroon and Gold Collective.
Yeah.
He was one of the first guys to sign with them. So will those same donors at Texas State be as willing to pony up money for guys if they know they can leave after 4 games? And oh, by the way, maybe another player could have gotten that money.
Maybe. I mean, I'll let Craven answer that as well, but I think that goes to his point about this being the reality, because then you have to start, hey, yeah, there's a possibility that this, because there are no contracts, which again gets to the Matt Sluka situation, right, where he says one thing, they say one thing, there's no ironclad contract, so maybe that involves collective bargaining. Obviously, that's another discussion, but maybe this is how it relates to each other, is that with these collectives having no ironclad contracts that keeps players here, or players having no real legal bounds to keep their, or things like that. Yeah, recourse to take action or whatever. But I'll just say this. I think Craven's on point about this being a reality for G5, and as we're seeing with SMU, maybe even some P5 programs. Craven, if you want to weigh in for the last time.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note when the Sluka stuff went down, everyone said, well, you can't have sympathy for him because he should have got it put on paper.
Right.
And I guess I feel the same way about the college, right? Like if you're Texas State or any of these schools, you can add into their NIL contract that they don't get the full amount of money till the end of the season, or you got to play an X amount of games to get the money. So, until these guys become employees and get on real contracts and there's adults in the room looking out for them, I'm not going to be the person who jumps on a kid for making a business decision.
Yeah.
I operate in the coaching world. I talk to coaches every single day about what they're thinking, what they're doing. And I have news. Your favorite coach is looking for a new job in October as well. Right. And so what's good for the goose is good for the gander. This thing has always been capitalism and getting the most that you can. And that's true for the school president, to the athletic director, to all of the coaches and the bloated staff. Just because the players have some power now doesn't mean we need to snap our necks in a reactionary way to take it away from them because they're using it in a way that assistant coaches have been using it to get new jobs since I've been around.
Yep. Yeah, but 2 things can also be true, because on the one hand, yes, the players have power. They should be making business decisions like this, and that's all well and good. But I feel there needs to be some protection for the Group of 5 program, because now you're saying in the winter a guy can leave, in the spring transfer portal a guy can leave, and oh, by the way, mid-season he can probably leave too. It's just all the time.
The protection is to give them a contract, to make them employees.
Yeah.
Right? But they haven't wanted to share any of their money that they've been getting rich off of for 40 years when these TV contracts have gotten way out of hand.
Right.
They paid themselves more.
Yep.
They paid the athletic director more. They paid the coaches more. They added analysts, right? They did everything that they could to hide the money and to go, hey, we spent it all. There is no money. They can't turn around and play broke because they have to start paying the people in their labor force. And I'm just not going to feel sorry for them until there's contracts in place and they make it like European soccer, where UT can go take the defensive end at UTSA, but you're going to owe UTSA some money for the training that they give them, for the housing that they give them, for the development that they give them. Until there's an equitable system here, I think the players can do what the coaches have been doing forever.
Yep, I agree. All right, we can have an entire discussion about a podcast about this alone, which may be an off-season discussion. We'll see, especially when we need news in the off-season. But we do have to move on. So we will end it there, and we will get to our games of the week. But before we do, we have a quick message from our sponsors at Be Well Texas.
Do you not want to do the power poll?
Oh, we can run through the power poll really quickly because that segment ran pretty long. So let's get the power poll really, really quickly because we had some. That is a good point because we did have a lot of movement.
Yeah, that's what I figured. Yeah.
Okay. We had some big results. Texas State plummeting all the way to 8. UNT vaulting up to 6. Sam Houston, hello at 5. That's something I can say was not on my radar in June, July. Craven, what was the reaction when you finished this on Saturday night that you said, "Oh, this team dropped/fell or rose a lot"?
I felt like the top 4 were pretty solidified. Texas, SMU, A&M, Tech. You could probably talk me into a few rankings there. If you want to have A&M in front of SMU or something, I'm cool with that. What I had trouble with was the Sam Houston, North Texas, TCU argument. I think TCU is probably the best football team of those 3 if we lined them up on a Saturday. But they got 2 losses. The other teams only have 1. I wanted to kind of reward that as we get into conference play.
Sure. Carter, was there anything that stood out to you?
No, I think that's exactly the way to do it. If it's judged by a pound-for-pound list, Sam Houston just has the more impressive resume than TCU has, and at some point we got to do this based off resume. So I totally agree with Sam Houston, North Texas, TCU at 5 through 7.
There you go. All right, you can go check out the Power Poll at TexasFootball.com. Updates every Saturday night. Thanks to our friends at Ticket City for sponsoring this year's Power Poll.